Hello friends! In the video we will explain what are some of the characteristics of the Aquarius era. But I will show it on a negative example that is now offered to humanity. So we live in the world where every phenomenon can be explained in a positive or negative, or let's say as yin or yang, as Chinese say. And although if one phenomenon is, or two phenomena actually, are sometimes typologically the same, on the semantic level they appear as completely different, even as opposite. And that is something that is offered to us. Before I start explaining these things, I will make a bit longer introduction. So whether we live in the era of Aquarius or not, and whether the shift of the precession point of the spring equinox can significantly affect the change of consciousness of humanity or not, we definitely and undoubtedly we live in a time of historical change, and this begins in the year 2020. And will probably end in the year 2025-2026. Now I'm not going to talk about that this actually started at the beginning of the 20th century, but let's leave that behind. So in the period from 2020 to 2023, Saturn is in Aquarius, and from 2023, Pluto will gradually enter this sign. Hence, because of these transits, we can not avoid to mention Aquarius and the influence of this archetype on the change of a human consciousness. So even those shorter transits are leading towards Aquarius. Of course, precession point and all other things are also leading us to the same direction. So I talk about the negative side of Aquarius in the video Technocracy, which I recommend to you very much. And also before that I recorded a video the name Plutocracy. So if you're interested in these subjects that are concerning the development of the society or the world we live in, please check these older videos, because this one is actually the continuation of Technocracy and Plutocracy. So our subject is today Aquarius. The ruler of Aquarius is the planet Uranus. Both are the archetypes of the development of collective consciousness. Aquarius represents brotherhood, unity, and equality. So you can recognize here slogans of the French Revolution, which were entirely Uranian, as well as the communism slogans, as well as this communists also spoke about that brotherhood, unity, and equality, and so on. I'm not going to discuss here how French Revolution ended and what the ideas of communism turned into, but just let's remember that the ideas were similar. So, but now it is important to stress here that already in the last century there was a significant manifestation of the spirit of Aquarius. So that happened a few times in the past, but in the last century it was very strong, the spirit of Aquarius in a way. It brought the principle of equality and uniting the masses, or very, very large groups of people, around one idea. And in the East, that was happening through the state system, that was communism, or in some countries socialism. And in the West, that happened through corporations. So many will now say, oh, how can you compare East and the West? The life on the West was much better. Yes, mostly was. But it is not known what large corporations in America have done and are doing, especially pharmaceutical one, and also those who are investing in climate change. But now, these years, we are learning really a lot about that. So, listen to that. The East was the first to complete its rather unsuccessful attempt to integrate the energy of Aquarius, which appeared in the last century, and they slowly transform into something else. When I say East, I mean mainly China and today's Russia or Soviet Union. While the West has yet to go through a process that will show a failed and even false attempt to integrate the Aquarius energy through the form of corporation. And only after that fail, transformation will really occur. So the year 2020, and especially the year 2023, will be absolutely crucial for America, when that country will have the return of Pluto. And immediately after that conjunction with American horoscope, Pluto actually enters the sign of Aquarius. And then the change in the whole world begins, actually. The idea of so-called globalism is essentially an ideology that corresponds to the idea of Aquarius. On the first sign, everything is fine with some sort of globalism. Because here they talk about some uniting and about that all countries and all people belong to the same something and so on. But it is only actually in words, this global connection. In essence, it means colonization. This is really old way of old colonizers. So I assume that with the transformation and the collapse, some sort of collapse of America in the coming years, the idea of globalism will fail. This globalism as we have today, because globalists use the American army to spread that brotherhood, right? So I'm using this little irony, but I think it will be something like that. Many will also say, but what is wrong with the globalism, with this idea that unites everybody? Well, in this video, I'm explaining what is wrong with that globalism. But before that, I would like to say that the era of Aquarius is focused on knowledge and not on acquiring material wealth, as it was until now. And to really talk about equality, it is impossible to maintain the slavership and the slave ownership system that we have now and we had for thousands of years, perhaps. Also, the age of Aquarius is not non-religious, but understands God through the law of the universe and speaks of energy and consciousness, not that much of soul, for example. This era theoretically implies the connection between man and God, or you can say man and the universe, through God's intelligence. And that connection will gradually become more and more alive and creative during the next thousands of years. Since it relies on universal law, then it will be an era which facts play an important role, or let's say scientific facts. And they're using that actually already. Because when you think about everything that is served in today's time in the fake medias, it is very typical for the Aquarius sign. They speak that doctors and scientists are saying that people need to have that injection. I'm not going to use that word. And that everything is good for the good of all of us because the science prove it. But actually when they do that, when they offer that to people, they actually want to break the connection between man and universe. Many say that they are now working on creation of the world government. Perhaps you heard about that, which will control the whole world and create one God for all and one system for all and so on. I must say that such thing cannot happen, never, but utopian attempts and great destruction are possible because of such attempt. So it is not possible to create one world government because we have yin and yang that are complement to each other. So the whole world will never have only one-sided idea. And secondly, there will be no governments. If we speak about the age of Aquarius and this new system, there is no need for any ruler. Rulers are not needed. You will see. Maybe we will live enough long to see how that will really happen. I know it sounds impossible to many, but it is really about that. So what we see is an attempt now for the so-called rulers to continue to rule actually only in accordance with the terminology and the concepts of Aquarius. So they're using this terminology, they're using concepts that are really Aquarian, but the same thing that they will continue to do as they did before means to colonize and to have slaves. So now you would ask, did they come up with all this, what is happening? No, of course not. For more than 100 years, humanity has been moving towards creating a new system in accordance with the spirit of time, if you will, and in accordance with the principles of Aquarius era. So the new system will probably be similar to that one that ruled during the Neolithic time in the human history, so for around the 5,000 years before Jesus. And this Neolithic lifestyle, let's say, was more or less the same in big parts of the world. There was no control and there was no ruler in that time. But in this new system that will come, also modern technology will play an important role. Because actually Aquarius is the sign of everything that is archaic and everything that is futuristic and visionary at the same time. So that's how this system will be created. I recently listened to an interview in which the UN, United Nations agenda, was explained, which should be implemented from the year 2020 until 2030, and which is public, so everyone can find and read that agenda. There are similar agendas already on the internet also. And I'm going to use this explanation of this agenda that I heard in one interview to explain the Aquarius era and its shadow, And such globalistic agendas there are many of them, It's not really the only one. You will notice that you know about all of those things that I will speak about. So, but I want to speak about Aquarius and its shadow. And let me first explain what is shadow. It is a very important term in Jungian psychology that signifies the unconscious side of being, either individual or collective. This part of the unconscious is very close to the conscious actually, and it is even a getaway to a higher level of being. The play of light and shadow is constantly present in the world and in the lives of individuals, and it is an important thing for spiritual growth. Now we need it. If humanity will need this play in the next 1,000 years, I don't think so, but we live with this now. So every light has its shadow and its darkness. Darkness is not only something negative. It is in the first place something that is unknown, it is hidden, and always something that causes shame. So people are ashamed of their shadow. Collective is also ashamed of their collective shadow, or a nation or a country. So nobody talks about their shadow because they are ashamed of it. And everybody has a moral problem with the shadow. But the shadow needs to be accepted. Everything we have, we should accept, even though it is very, very painful process. Because when we ignore the shadow, then we project it on somebody else. And if we project it on somebody else and we do not accept that it is ours, after some time, the great evil can happen, because the shadow can overcome somebody, and then people do really bad things. Also, it works for individual and collective. And that is exactly what is happening now in a global scale. The shadow has totally conquered a big part of the Western civilization, And you can call these groups globalists, colonizers, deep state, or whatever you want. And since they cannot admit to themselves that they are the same or even worse than that East, their enemies, so they cannot accept that they are even worse, they are ready to go to war and maybe to kill, by killing their enemies, they would actually kill their own evil, their darkness, what they are ashamed of. Please note that the shadow is the same as light, only in the reverse form. So when it tries to conquer the light, it does the same thing as the light does. Only the shadow does it is in its perverted way. So it's like when a servant imitates a master whom he hates and loves at the same time. We will now see the shadow manifestation based on the globalistic agenda. And you will see that two terms are very important in this agenda: money and slave control, although they do not appear explicitly anywhere. And money and slave control is exactly that, which is in total disagreement with Aquarius energy or some Aquarius era, if we speak about that. So what do they speak about? They say the end of poverty. Sounds very good, doesn't it? No one should be poor. Potentially, in that potential era of Aquarius, we will not be really equal, but everyone will have according to their own needs, and that will be actually also regulated in accordance with the needs of the collective. But what globalists mean when they say the end of poverty? They mean the use of GMO food. Why? Because if they can control food production, they can control human nutrition or human lives. Everybody will have to buy the seeds from them, and nobody can produce for themselves, and so on and so on. So I'm not going to go into details here. Then they say that there is some climate change. First of all, there is no climate change. The climate is changing, as Milankovitch cycles say, and in 10,000 years there can be some very big change in the climate. They're creating it. It is very big and important part of this agenda, and it's related to GMO food and the seed control. So they're now destroying the nature for a few decades already, that nothing can be planted on Earth. And by throwing something through the air. And they are also talking all the time about some terrible emission of some gas or something into the air that is the result of the production. And they actually want to control the production by talking about that the nature is destroyed by the big production. But of course, if somebody thinks normally, then a person would say, why we do not stop producing that much? Why we do not create non-consumer society? Why will somebody pay the tax for some abnormal production? This is one thing. But by the way, this agenda concerning climate change is gaining more and more importance now. And I'm shooting this video in July 2021, and we have already seen devastating tornadoes in Europe, which are unremembered, and they're not normal for this part of the world. And this, of course, is used to spread fear, to destroy nature, to destroy human lives, to blackmail presidents and prime ministers of the states, because they can, for example, say to them, well, if you do not do that, we send you tornado and this kind of things. So it is really, really a very dangerous thing, and it is covered under some climate change. Then they speak about healthy living. And this sounds very good, because the conscious person does not destroy his health. But behind that is actually the change of human DNA. And that change is fine if someone has, for example, hereditary diseases. So why not to change when science allows that? But for globalists and perverted rulers, this means that they will design people. That's what they started to do already, by this which is now massively used, this injection. And eugenics has been presently widespread, unfortunately, for many years already. Then they speak about education and lifelong learning, which also sounds really good. What else can a person do better than learn? But this means for them something like it was in the time of Mao Zedong in China, when there were people on the streets waving with red books and they were brainwashed. Of course, in this agenda, they don't mean to do it completely like that, but the idea is the same. So this means constant propaganda, not really learning. Then they speak about gender equality. Great. Aquarius is the sign of emancipation. So it may be necessary in some parts of the world to speak about gender equality if that people want that and need that. But behind this is actually hidden birth control. So those who want to have children will have to ask for the permission. But actually we can go further. Children are not needed in this new system that they want to create. I spoke about that in my video, Technocracy. And even if somebody has children, the system actually wants to take control over children. So parents will not decide about the lives of their children, but the system will decide what to do with them. This is some sort of fascism. It was exactly the same, actually, as it was in the fascism time. Not to mention that abuse of children is hidden behind this and all of those terrible things. So then they speak about providing drinking water to everyone. Very interesting. I guess it is not necessary to privatize all the sources of water of the world so that the water is available to everyone, what they are doing. There is a lot of water in some parts of the world, so they can have their water. And, of course, we could, for example, bring water to those who don't have it and solve the problem. It is not necessary to privatize all of the sources of water on the earth by globalists. I hope that you agree with this. So then they speak about propagation of ecological energy and cheap energy. Well, in perverted world, this would probably mean the use of energy that is dangerous for people and nature and that is very expensive. What else can we guess if we know how they think? And instead of that, could be perhaps better to use free energy, which is natural and accessible to everyone, and which Nikola Tesla worked on. So maybe it would be much easier than to speak about some strange ecological and strange cheap energy, to just use works of Nikola Tesla which are hidden from us. Then they speak about economic growth and full employment. The first question would be, why constantly some growth? Isn't better for everything to be for everyone there and not worry about any growth of anything? So sometimes we have a bit more, sometimes we have a bit less, but we are standard. And why full employment? Why? That's very, very interesting. That was like in the communism time, when everybody was employed. But in the age of Aquarius, with the use of modern technology, it is absolutely not necessarily to be employed, because a system that can possibly be created with this Aquarian energy would be the system where everyone who wants will work and contribute to the community when the community needs it and when that someone also is able to help the community or maybe take something from that community. So in this Aquarian type of society, employment becomes completely unnecessary. And if we reach this one day, no one will talk about employment. So this is all terminology here. They failed completely. Then they speak about stable infrastructure. Sounds very good, but behind this, in this agenda, is actually that people will pay toll and everything that they use, like bridges and roads and these kind of things. Then something that they are quite obsessed about is the idea of safe cities. This is funny to talk about that much because many cities are very safe. We do not need to be that worried. Especially cities in ex-communist and socialist countries, they are mainly quite safe. But this actually means total control in the cities with cameras everywhere and so on, and separation in the cities of rich and poor. And if you cannot imagine this, imagine feudal castles. In feudal castles, there was some lord or somebody like that who was on the top of the castle. And then there are other ordinary people who live on his land, who work for him, and they depend completely on his mercy. So why would be this idea here? Well, because the same people, the same structure, the same mind creates this future. They did not change at all since the feudal time. So they speak about progress, but they actually live in the 12th or 13th century. But this Aquarius archetype will actually bring something like socialism, in which everyone will have property that will be his, and at the same time this property will also be common. I know that it sounds strange for many of you, but this is the only possible way. Then this agenda speaks about using of the ocean and seas. They discovered how to use resources that are in the oceans and in the seas, and they simply want to have monopoly on the use, and that's why they speak about that. So behind this part of agenda, it's of course not hidden that they want to clean the waste that is in oceans and in the seas, and that is created by capitalists with their insane production. So they don't speak about cleaning the ocean. They speak about more exploitation of the oceans and the seas. So how you will know that the era of Aquarius is really coming? Well, you will notice that there will not be plastic bottles and other disgusting waste in the oceans and the seas. Please, now when we speak about that, take into account that computers, cars, household electrical, machines and these kind of things, they last only 2 years in today's time. This is the result of mass production. People use refrigerator for 2 years and they throw it away in the ocean or somewhere on the earth. When this stops, then we can talk about Aquarius age. Then this agenda speaks an inclusive society that allows all citizens access to justice. Since this is still possible in almost all countries of the world, then the question is, what is hidden behind this? Well, in many countries, only rich people are able to conduct lawsuits against the rich, while the poor men will, according to this agenda, will not have money to pay for the tax. And this actually is already in America and many other countries. So people who are poor people, they actually have no access to law. And this is what they want to apply everywhere in their globalistic society. Interesting is what are they doing in this field of law and law, how to say in English, I forgot, in the law system. This is already very dangerous because they, as typical colonizers, want to regularly colonize everybody. They want to colonize everybody legally. So the shadow here imitates human laws and make people accept that it is by law that they have nothing, that they know nothing, that they want someone to brainwash them, that they want to be genetically modified, that they want that somebody takes care of their children, that they want that somebody sells to them water, air, and so on and so on. So this is already happening in a large scale in many countries in the world. Then they speak about global partnership, which sounds perfect, especially for small countries. Oh, we can be partner to America or somebody. But this is just a new form of colonization. There is no any global partnership. This actually also abolition. This is abolition of nation states or states of one nation. You know, they don't want this anymore because these nations are like countries are separated in nations as it is in Europe or somewhere else in the close east and so on. This is problem for them. They cannot globalize them properly because nations have their interests, their culture, and so on. So they want to make the world with no borders. Well, actually, this is really going to happen in so-called Age of Aquarius. There will not be borders, but this will happen spontaneously because people will connect indeed without borders in the future, and actually they will not need any supervision. And globalists don't know, they think that they should supervise it. So it's still early for this. Then they speak about ecosystem protection. This is absolutely fantastic. This is the peak of responsibility brought by the Aquarius era possible. But what this means for globalists? It means that only globalists can use forests and natural resources of one country or one region. For example, if one country has forests or some other resources in the earth, they cannot use it. Only globalists can use it, or if somebody wants to use it, they have to ask for the permission and even pay for the permission. So you see, I'm not going to speak about all of these parts of this agenda. I guess it is enough. And here you see that in this agenda, actually, people are excluded. They are trying to introduce some sort of absolute and total control of everything that exists in this world. And why? Why they're so obsessed? Well, first of all, they wanted to do that always, just they were hidden. And they were speaking against communists, but they were also all actually having the same ideas. And now the trouble is that we are developing in such a way that collective will overcome the needs of rich individuals. And now they're, of course, afraid of people. I hope that you understand the dangerous game of light and shadow here, as well as that shadow is actively trying to conquer light, or the truth, you can say. However, the shadow can never rule, and if it starts ruling, then the end of life happens. For example, when a person is overpowered by shadow, he is no longer conscious being, and he cannot consciously control his behavior, so he ends up in the madhouse. And of course, part of the Western civilization is kind of madhouse that tries actually to cover up its shadow. What the Aquarius era brings and what many know are certainly, many very important people know about this. It is certainly that in the future, everyone must have everything they need. So slavery, capitalism, and so-called democracy are part of the past. So still many will now ask, but everything is now through internet and it's regulated by satellites. So then how one can say that there is not going to be control? Well, if we speak about some age of Aquarius or Aquarian energy, that energy also thinks about control. Control will be, and it will be by the collective, and it will be through an individual himself. So everyone will have the opportunity to control because of collective interests. Of course, the first thing that comes to my mind, and perhaps to your mind now, is regard China, which has always had some organization from Confucius' time until today, where the collective was organized in that way to control people, and everybody had the right position in that society. And that's why how some exploitation or the destruction of the common good was prevented. And in China, even if they have this technological, high developed technological society now, actually everything is the same as it was always before. Certainly, I am not so fanatical to think that this system, which is now in China today, should be applied to the whole world. Of course not. But something similar will be in other parts of the world in accordance with the need of the specific group of people or nation. And that we see now in China, what we see now in China and everywhere else in the world is some sort of mixture of two systems, the old and the new one. But crystallization will occur sometime when we will be ready for that. Of course, if we do not destroy ourselves completely before that. And I must say here, unfortunately, the reason for creating a universal brotherhood and developing a cautious attitude towards our planet can also be large-scale destruction. I hope that will not happen in order to make us to think different. Maybe we will arrive to that where we should be in an easier way. In essence, we now in today's world observe two processes. One is destructive and can destroy the world, and the other process is the creation of this new world. Official America, NATO, and many of those who support them are the destructive power of the world. But they use the same terminology as it is used by those who are gradually creating new world from within. The shadow of the destructive forces of today's world has completely taken over the concepts that belong to that new possible future system. But in fact, they do the opposite, as we showed in today's video. They have turned everything upside down, and things that they were doing before secretly, they are now doing publicly. Take, for example, how much they speak about democracy in Western politics, and then they wrote about that in Times magazine how they stole the presidential elections in America. Or take that President Biden made 50 to 60 executive decisions as soon as he came to the office, but no one asked people and the parliament if they wanted or not. So the question is that democracy they talk about? They talk also about human freedom and human rights, but we are living in an almost total censorship equal to the Inquisition time, where everybody who is opposed to the official agenda is removed from social networks or it's ridiculed or something like that. Everybody who is important. The culmination of this removal was the removal of American President Trump from social networks. So what else needs to happen to understand that we live the new Inquisition? And finally, many will now tell me, prove that what you are saying is true. Well, it is very popular game in today's time played by light and shadow. Someone, for example, does great evil and he hides. And when others point a finger at him and say, "You are doing great evil," then this one says, "Prove it." This is typical game of shadow and light, very, very much presented in our world. So now the light is looking for arguments. But the shadow always twists the truth, and there is no evidence, even they are completely visible to everyone. So I will not prove anything to anyone here. I will say what is happening as I did, and everyone else will see if they want it. There is no need to prove anything. When everyone sees, the shadow will disappear. And that's all for now. If you like to schedule personal consultations with me, please be free. You will find what I offer on my web pages named Symbolic Thinking. I always say in my English videos that I don't have that much materials in English as I have in Serbian and in Czech languages, but I still offer consultations based on astrological psychology, spiritual astrology, feng shui, and theta healing. On my website, I offer online in English only course for beginners, online astrology course. So maybe you will like to order that. All of the links will be under this video on YouTube, and if you like the video, forward and subscribe to my channel, and thank you very much for that in advance. And until next time, I wish you to see and not to prove.